All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Monte Poker. The last couple videos we were out in Las Vegas. First one was awesome, second one was mid, third one was It was our first time out doing big tournaments. I think I should have captured a little bit more hands for you guys on that third video, but I promise we'll do better next time. It was a great trial run though. Anyhow, we're happy to bring you back to the normally scheduled programs. Today's session is from back in April. We're getting even further from getting up to date from the cash game sessions. So I tried to mix two sessions into one, but the session had a lot of crazy hands. It was mad deja vu. You'll understand what I mean in a second. Anyhow, thank you all for stopping by. Let's jump right in. First hand of the night starts off with pocket jacks, and we run into an unfortunate situation where we get it all in pre-flop versus aces. And literally our first hand of the night, I didn't even have my camera set up, so I couldn't get the pre-flop action for you guys. But it was basically bet, raise, re-raise, jam, call. Me being the person that jammed. Pretty stupid to jam for 300 here with jacks pre, but you know, how else do you play jacks in said situation? I was really hoping our opponent showed us ace king. That didn't happen to be the case, and this is how it went. Give me a jack. Actually, no, jack wouldn't help me. All right, you got it. So unfortunately, we did end up losing this hand. I had a pair of jacks. Our opponent had a pair of aces, giving him the best 5 cards. On the turn, the king of spades did give us an open-ended straight. If we would have hit a 9 or an ace, we would have had 5 sequential numbers and or letters for those of you that are a bit newer to poker. Unfortunately, the river was not the card that we needed, but that's all right, because you know what's better than getting pocket jacks your very first hand? Getting pocket jacks your third hand. So we did lose a majority of our money in that first hand, so I had to add on for another $200. With 260 total in the stack, I decide to bet 10. I end up getting 2 opponents that want to see the flop with me, so 30 bucks in the middle, going 3 ways. The board comes 10, 6, ace, rainbow. Rainbow indicating that there are 3 different suits out there. Unfortunately, this is not great for our hand. What's even worse is our opponent leads out for $25. It's too soon for us to give up in case he does not have this ace. A 5 of clubs comes on the turn. Our opponent bets again, and this time I do believe that he has the ace. It just sucks that we literally had to fade either an ace, a king, or a queen with this hand, and one of them hit. It's rather unfortunate. I throw it in the middle. We're not going to go all in this time, and our opponent is nice enough to show us the ace of hearts. So we were in fact very behind. Our jacks lost twice, but there's no way they lose thrice, right guys? We get 2 black jiggities once again, under the gun +1 with 197 in our stack. An opponent behind us let out for $11. I decided to put in the call along with a few other opponents. We're playing this a bit timidly because we've gotten slapped around with the jiggities, but not this time because the board runs out 2 of clubs, 4 of spades, 3 of spades. And to make matters even better, one of our opponents bets $20. 2 players fold, and when the action gets back to me, I start lining up some chips for a small raise. Now, I don't want to raise too much because I want our opponent to call. I think we're ahead right now, so I raise it to 40. The players in between us get out of the way, and when the action gets back to the original bettor, he does decide to call the extra $20 here. So we're off to this turn heads up, and it comes the jack of hearts. What an absolute dream card. We turn a set. Our opponent checks over to us, and I decide to bet $65 here. This is a good enough price for any sort of straight or flush draws to continue if that's what our opponent has, and he does indeed put in the call. And then disaster strikes on the river. A 5 of diamond peels off. Our opponent checks it over to us, but it's very hard for us to continue betting on this card. Any ace has us beat with a straight, ace through the 5. Any hand like 4-5 suited, 5-6 suited is also beating us with 2 pair or a straight. The only thing we basically beat here is a missed flush draw if our opponent had 2 spades, in which case I don't think our opponent would be checking it over to us, because if we bet again, he's gonna have to fold. The only way he can win with 2 spades is by betting us off the hand, so he probably would have bet very large with 2 spades. So I do decide to check it back in this situation, and our opponent shows us pocket 6s.
Oh, you can. The cards are killing me today. Oh, wow. You had so far? Huh? I had like 7 hands, maybe, 3 of them were jacks. 8, 10.
I think half.
So as you heard, half of our hand since we sat down have been pocket jacks, so why change up tradition? I told you it was going to be a deja vu session, so here we go once again. Will they hold up this time? Who knows? A couple of people tried to limp in for $3, so I decided to put in a raise here to $16. A lot of people have been folding to $10 to $12 bets pre-flop, so I get pretty annoyed that when we bet 16, everybody and their mom decided to come along for the ride. Our hand is very vulnerable into this many opponents. There's $96 in the middle. Hopefully the board comes a bunch of little cards and we can just make a substantial bet to get everybody off of their face cards, and the king of diamonds peels off on the board. The action checks over to us. I don't really have a choice besides checking back, although I do want to take a stab at this, but with this many people in the hand, it's very unlikely that we're good. And then one of our opponents bets 30. This pretty much lets us know that we're definitely not good. Another player in the middle calls the 30, and one more player after him calls the 30. So at this point, this is typically a fold, but now I'm just getting stupid and crazy trying to make my money back, hoping to spike a jack on the turn. So I end up putting in the $30 just because of the pot odds here. I do not recommend this. You're not going to improve a lot of the time, especially not when the 10 of hearts peels off on the turn. And this is where we get really wild in. The action checks over to us, and I'm thinking that because a couple of players have already folded to the initial flop bet, we might be able to get a bluff through representing the 10. If we bet enough, we might even be able to get the king to fold his hand here. So I decide to go for it. I'm thinking that $80 might be a big enough size to get the king to fold. It's not a lot compared to the size of the pot, but considering each player has only put in $40, it is a substantial amount considering how much each individual player has put in. And unfortunately, the player to my left puts in the call pretty quickly. Now I'm kind of worried that this opponent may have a 10. He didn't even really think about it that much. I think anybody with the king would take some time with this many players in the hand to consider whether or not they had the 10. And to make matters even worse, player in early position also put in the call. He did take a little bit more time to think about it, so I'm thinking this opponent might be the one with the king. But at this point, I don't think I'm going to win here. Even if I go all in here, I don't think I'm going to get either one of these people to fold. Potentially one, but definitely not both. 3 of diamonds doesn't change anything on the river. Early position player shoves for his entire stack, which is about 105 or 110 here. And now we're just posturing. We got caught, tried to steal the pot, didn't work. We don't really have much of an option here but to fold. So we do in fact muck our hand, but at least we get to see what each opponent has because the player after us puts in the call. We get shown ace 10 and 10-4 for trips versus a full house. That was just poor timing on our part. We tried to represent a hand that both of our opponents were holding. There was no way we were ever going to get that bluff through, unfortunately. Congratulations to the guy to my left for scooping that massive pot. About 30 minutes go by before we get involved in our next hand. We look down at King Jack offsuit in the hijack with 279 in our stack. The hijack just means we are in later position. We are the third last player to act for all the new people, which just means we get a lot more information. Anyhow, there's a couple of us going to this flop with $52 in the middle. We flop top pair with a pretty good kicker here. There's some straight draws available. Queen 10 already has a straight. 8, 9, and 9, 10 are hands that people like to commonly play because they're pretty good on these type of boards, specifically because they have a pair with a straight draw. So I decided to check to see if anybody else has any hands that they want to take a stab at this board with, and we instantly get punished by a 10 coming out there. We have the best pair on this board available, but now any 7 has a straight, any queen has a straight. I bet $25 here, but I pretty much consider this a bluff because there's a lot of hands that we're losing to. 8, 9, 9, 10, 10 jack, queen jack even now is dominating us even though we were ahead of them on the flop. Our opponent quickly calls to the left. The action folds around. The player to my right takes some time but does end up folding. So now we can literally only improve by hitting the, oh, would you look at that, the queen of spades. So no flush got there. We have what we like to call the second nuts, which means the second best available hand for my newer players. We are only losing to ace king here. I don't put our opponent on ace king because he would have had to call with the intention of hitting a queen, which is highly unlikely. Our opponent does not seem to like this last card. I'm assuming he had a queen and already had the straight, so he does end up putting the call. We show the king high straight and our hand is good. Super lucky river there. I'm pretty sure he had us crushed on the turn, but we sucked out on him and finally have some chips moving in the right direction. We won one! A few minutes go by before we look down at King 10 offsuit under the gun +1. We only limped in for $3, so this pot is relatively small. There's about 6 players in here, and then we end up flopping top 2 on this board here. King 10 hits the board with 2 diamonds. Our opponent leads out for about what looks like $30 here into a relatively small pot. He's telling us that he has a pretty strong hand, but we also have a pretty strong hand, so I'm going to go ahead and raise him. I bet $60. This bet sizing is intended to get the main opponent that raised to call, but everybody else to fold. This is exactly what happens. He quickly puts in the call. 138 in the pot. 6 of diamond comes on the turn, and our opponent bets out $75. I quickly put in the call here. The reason we called so quickly is because I'm putting our opponent on one of 2 hands. I'm putting him on ace king with potentially the ace of diamonds. The reason I believe that is because of how quickly he bet the diamond turn card. If he did not have the ace of diamonds, he would have been more afraid of the flush, but because of how quickly he threw that amount of money out there, I'm assuming he either isn't afraid of the flush because he has the ace of diamonds, so he knows I'm not on the nut flush draw, or he may have been on the flush draw himself, which is the second hand I thought he may have had. So we're ahead of ace king with the ace of diamonds, but we're obviously losing to the flush, so I went ahead and put in the call pretty quickly here, and I just want to see what our opponent is going to do on the river card. If another diamond comes, we have to fold, but if no more diamonds come and he checks it to us, our 2 pair is most likely good, so we'll have the green light to bet again. And the river comes a king of hearts. We have the best possible hand on this board. Our opponent checked before this card came out, so I'm not quite sure what he's holding. I decided to bet out for $75, which is what he bet on the previous street. He ends up showing us 5-8 of diamonds for the flush, but our full house is best. Yet another pot being scooped in the right direction. Sticking to today's theme, we have a deja vu hand, King 10 offsuit once again. This time we are on the hijack with 735 in our stack. There was an $11 pre-flop open. We decided to just call it. King 10 is a nice hand, but it's not an amazing hand. I definitely don't want to 3-bet or go too big with this hand because we're only going to get called by better. The flop comes out Queen 10-9, so we have middle pair, and we also have a gut shot along with a backdoor spade draw. Sometimes I can argue for making a bet here with middle pair, good kicker. With this many people, there's a good chance somebody has a queen though, so I did elect to check, and then we drilled a straight on the turn. Even better, an opponent leads out for $25 here. I grabbed some chips. I grabbed the amount that she had out, which was 25, with the intention of raising her to 50, and then I realized this is one of the tightest players at the table, and we don't have the best possible straight. Ace king is beating us, so instead of raising, I decided to just go ahead and call instead. Had I bet the flop, I think I would have been more okay continuing on the turn, but since we gave her that jack for free, it's a bit scary. 8 of diamonds comes on the river. Doesn't really change our hand. We still have a king high straight. Our opponent bets 50. We call, and she has ace king. It's rather unfortunate that we made our straight and the opponent had a higher straight. I don't think we played this hand poorly considering how many people were involved on the flop. Our opponent hit their dream card, which we thought was our dream card, but it ended up being a total nightmare. But that's poker, ladies and gentlemen. Breaking your regularly scheduled deja vu program, we finally get a different hand. We look down at pocket kings on the button with 788 in our stack. It has been quite a while since we picked up some premium. Luckily enough, some players have already put some money in the middle, so we get to go for a small raise here. One player bet $15, another player called right after him, so I decided to make it 60. This should be a big enough amount that any garbage hands should get out of the way, and maybe one of these 2 players will put in the call. So the under the gun player does end up putting in the call, and then the middle position player decides to come along as well. So we're gonna go 3 ways to this flop. We have a good pot building with $180 in the middle. The flop comes out 10-9 jack. A bit scary for our kings, but we are above the board and we have a gut shot with a queen. One of our opponents decides to lead out for $100, and then immediately afterwards the middle position player goes all in for $130. 139. We're obviously going to stay in this pot. Now the question is, do we want to raise or just call? If I re-raise when our opponent already has $100 in there, I don't think I'm going to get called by worse. For example, if I go 300 or 400, I don't think he's going to call with just a pair of jacks, just a pair of nines, or just a pair of tens. He'll probably only call if he has a set or a straight already made. So for those reasons, I just go ahead and put in the call of 139 because the opponent behind us is going to call the extra 39 with any single pair holdings. And then if the board gets worse for us, we can let it go. If the queen comes, we'll improve so we can go for a small sizing. Now the turn comes a 7 of spades. That does put us straight out there, but I don't think anyone has an 8. So I'm definitely going to bet on this card. And as I start grabbing some chips to bet around $200, our opponent throws his cards away before I even cross the line. So we're off to this turn, heads up, which brings us the 6 of diamonds. I flip over my kings. Our opponent looks at it and says, "You're good," and throws his cards away. Technically, he's supposed to show first, but I thought we were good in that spot, so I showed him my hand first. We probably should have captured it for the vlog, but it is what it is. We play with him all the time, so I didn't want him to sit there and have to wait to see the winning hand. And we're finally here at our last hand of the night, and my god, is it a doozy. We look down at pocket fives in middle position with 1175 in our stack. There was a $15 open from the under the gun player. The under the gun +1 called, I called, middle position +1 called, another player on the cutoff, I believe, or the button also called, and then the small and big all called. So we're going to this flop 7 ways with 105 in the middle. The board comes 4, 6, 7 with 2 clubs. This is a super wet board and we are open-ended, meaning any 4 or 8 would give us a straight. And while I'm contemplating whether or not I'm going to bet into this pot, try and build it up in case our draw gets there, the big blind decides to bet $70. So we no longer have to determine a bet sizing on this pot. Now we just have to decide whether or not we want to play this all the way down to the river. The reason I'm saying we have to play this down to the river is because if I call on this flop chasing my straight draw and the turn does not improve our hand, we're gonna have to call another street most likely to see if we can hit that straight. And considering the flop bet is $70 and this pot is going to get really big, we might have to call anywhere between $200 to $300 on the next street, which is totally not that bad compared to our stack size. But the problem is we've already bought in multiple times today. You saw how many times we got crushed with pocket jacks earlier in the session, so we're already in for a couple bullets and we're up a couple $100 in profit. So now we have to decide, are we going to send it or just go home with a couple hundred in cash? I'll give you guys a second to comment down below and let me know what you would do in this situation. All right, did you do it? All right, cool. Obviously, mama ain't raised no B, so we're gonna have to send it here and try to get a double up on top of the small profit we have already made. So we grab some chips and do in fact put in the call here, which brings the pot up to $245. The player right after me ends up folding, and much to my surprise, it looks like the player at the other end of the table decides to put in the call as well. So we have the button coming along. Considering what's out there, the most likely hand that he has is the flush draw. Maybe he has a pair with the flush draw, for example, a 7 of clubs. I have no idea what the big blind has. He just sat down at the table, so it's a bit disguised. The 2 of hearts comes on the turn, which does not help our hand at all. I don't expect anybody to have 7 deuce, 4 deuce, or 6 deuce in this spot, so I don't think that improves our opponent's hands at all. Maybe ace 3 of clubs now has a straight draw on top of it. So after some deliberating, the big blind does decide to bet again, this time for $220. Now this is a bit scary. I don't expect our opponent to already have a made straight because he would have to have something like 5-8 or 3-5, which even on the big blind, I don't expect them to be playing too often unless they're suited, so that's less combinations of that hand available. And if he had a straight, I feel like he'd be betting a lot smaller. This just feels like a large sizing for an already made straight. He probably wants to keep people in, not push people out of the pot. So I think he might have a hand like maybe 2 pair or even a set. Betting 200 into 545 is not really the right price for me to call here and chase my straight, but the player behind me is still in the hand, and because I think he is on the flush draw, I do believe he's going to put in the call behind me. So for those reasons, I do think I am getting a good price to chase my straight here, considering that if I call and the player behind me calls, it's only costing me $230 to make about 1,000 if we do end up hitting our hand, plus any more that we can get out of these two opponents on the river if we do hit. So for those reasons, I do decide to call, and the player behind me folds before my chips even cross the line again. Yikes, man. Now this pot is not as big as I thought it was going to be. We're unfortunately stuck in this situation, so we go off to this river heads up, and nice, would you look at that, we hit the 3, and more importantly, it is not a club. In this situation, in my opponent's shoes, the flush draw is the most obvious draw that was available on the board. Like I said, we're not on the flush draw because I think our opponent behind us was on it. We're obviously on the straight draw. We're also not holding any clubs, which makes it more likely that our opponent has clubs. So now I'm just trying to think of how we can extract the maximum amount of value from our opponent in this situation. If he checks it over to us, I probably want to bet anywhere between $200 to $300. This size looks big enough that we're basically saying we have a really big hand. Wait, hold on. What's going on here? This man is grabbing black chips. This man is grabbing black chips and more. Oh my gosh, he just bet 420. At this point, I'm looking down at my chip stack, looking at his bet sizing, seeing how much I have behind, and I only have a little bit over 800 left in my stack. So at this point, I think getting the rest of it in is the best thing to do. So I do announce all in, and then our opponent immediately sits up from his chair. At this point, he goes into the tank for quite a while. I would say at least 3 or 4 minutes. He does ask for a count, so the dealer lines up the chips and gives them the total. He then asks how much more it would be for him to call, so the dealer takes out the 420 that was owed to the pot and shows him that it's going to be 420 something more, 430 something more for him to call. So he basically needs to call off another 400 to make 2400 with whatever hand he has. And that's when our opponent says the following. At the time, I was excited because I thought we were going to get paid here, but after I went back and looked at the footage, I realized that this man did not raise pre-flop with a bunch of people flatting 15, so there's no way he has aces. He was probably just trying to get some information out of us. Luckily, we didn't give any up. Eventually, our opponent does put in the fold, and we show the table that we did in fact have it this time. And with this final hand, we are wrapping up this session with a massive profit. Ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up our show. But before we sign off, we have to give you the profit and losses for the bankroll update. It's 11:48 on Thursday night. I'm late on this video, so I'm not gonna throw the on-screen overlay. I apologize, but I will tell you that we bought in for 1,000, yikes, and we cashed out for 1160, which skyrocketed our total profit to $7,463 to date. Now that's poker. As per usual, thank you if you made it this far into the video. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Share with a homie if you haven't already. Thank you to all the new subscribers that we got while we were out in Vegas and the local Sunshine Poker League. I can't tell you how much it means to me that you're always watching and checking in and reviewing hands with me, and just overall giving me great ideas for the vlog. Put a lot of time and effort into these videos, and hearing how much you all enjoy watching really makes my day. Thank you for your patience and forgive me for being a day late. See y'all next week.